Welcome, everybody, to this week's episode of the Lindsey Elmore Show. This week, we are talking about how mental health plays into the adoption of addictions, even at very, very young ages, and that the weight of addiction can carry you for years and be a burden on you for years until something happens that makes you make a change. First up, I'll be talking with Erin Khar. She is the author of Strung Out, One Last Hit and Other Lies That Nearly Killed Me. After that, I will be sharing with you one of my favorite mental health practices, the practice of yoga. We will be talking about how yoga actually changes your brain and the way that you process your nerves, your fears, your emotions, and helps you to stay centered. Welcome to the Lindsey Elmore Show, a podcast that helps you find fulfillment amidst chaos. On this show, I interview thought leaders, doctors, creatives, spiritual gurus, and game changers who inspire you to pursue your dreams, overcome obstacles, and leave your mark. Erin Khar is known for her writing on addiction, recovery, mental health, relationships, parenting, infertility, and self-care. Her weekly advice column, Ask Erin, is published on Ravishly. Her personal essays have appeared in national publications including Self, Marie Claire, HuffPost, Esquire, Cosmopolitan, Good Housekeeping, and many, many others. She is the recipient of the Eric Hoffer Editor's Choice Prize, and her prize-winning essay was featured in Best New Writings of 2012. Her essays have been published in the Stigma Fighters Anthology and Burn It Down, Women Writing About Anger. Her debut memoir, Strung Out, One Last Hit and Other Lies That Nearly Killed Me, has appeared on most anticipated lists from The Rumpus, Self, Apple Books, Bitch Media, Alma, and others. She lives here in New York City, and I wish that she could be here in the studio, but as we are all staying home these days, we're recording this on March the 26th, I am inviting Erin Khar. Welcome to the Lindsey Elmore Show.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here virtually.
Oh, yes, absolutely. So get us started on your journey through the depths of addiction. Where did it start? How did it create this repetitive behavior? And how did you ultimately make the decision that this was not the lifestyle you wanted to live?
So, when speaking about addiction, which I do a lot, I always say that addiction is there before the drugs come in. The drugs are really symptomatic of what's at the core of addiction for most people. By the age of 8, I was already really struggling with depression and anxiety. I had a lot of suicidal ideation. And one day I was sitting in my room having a panic attack, which I didn't know was a panic attack. I just didn't have the language for what was happening. I just felt that overwhelming need to cut myself out of my own skin. I felt like I was going to jump out the window if I didn't do something. I walked into our bathroom, opened the medicine cabinet. I wasn't even quite sure what I was looking for, but there was an expired bottle of Darvocet and didn't know what it was. It had been there a long time. Nobody had touched it. It had my grandmother's name on it, so she must have been prescribed it for something, and it was just sitting in our medicine cabinet. There was a label on it, a warning label that said may cause drowsiness, with a picture of a man with little bubbles around his head looking sleepy. And that's exactly what I wanted. I didn't know what the drug was. I didn't know that it was an opiate. I just knew that I wanted some relief from these overwhelming feelings that I had. Right. I took one. Okay. And really liked what it did for me. It provided me some distance from myself. It provided me that distance from those feelings. It allowed me to compartmentalize my body and my mind and those feelings in different places. And I really liked that feeling. It gave me a sense of control that I was lacking. Over the next few years, from time to time, I would look in the medicine cabinets of family members, friends' parents, and anything that had a warning label on it. I mean, half of them, I don't know what they were. I
Oh
would just see the
no.
warning label, and I'd just take one out and save it away for another day and hope that it did something.
Right.
By the time I was 13, I was in, the full swing of adolescence. Those feelings of depression and suicidal ideation were really increasing for me. And at that point, I was a little savvier about pills. I knew what Vicodin was. I knew what Valium was. Those were things that I'd seek out.
Right. Okay.
I went on a date with a boy I'd met on a skiing trip.
Okay.
And, I came from an upper middle class family, had everything you could think of on the outside, perfect grades, horseback rode, was a cheerleader, a volleyball player. My parents were divorced. I had lied to my mom and told her I was spending the night at a friend's house after going horseback riding.
Okay.
I had him pick me up at the barn and we drove to his house. He lived in Beverly Hills. I was in another suburb of Los Angeles, and his parents weren't there. We were spending time together, and I started having that panicky feeling and asked him if he had any Valium or Vicodin.
Oh wow.
He
Okay.
was a
And
little,
you were 13.
I was 13. I had also lied to him. I told him I was 15. He was 16.
Okay. All
I had
right.
turned 13. It was 10 days after my 13th birthday. So I had just turned 13. This is in eighth
Okay.
grade.
And if you don't mind me putting,
Sure.
revealing your age, what year was this?
This was end of 1986. So I'm 46 now.
So
Yeah.
most people think this is like a new kind of problem
Mhm.
of like young children having massive access to pills, but your story really goes against that conception.
Yeah.
So just continue. So you asked him if he
Sure.
had any Vicodin or any Valium.
Yes, and he said no. And then he asked me if I'd ever tried heroin. I
Oh,
knew what heroin was in a vague sort of way. I was pretty well read and had seen a lot of probably age inappropriate films. I had a concept of it and I knew that it got you really high, but I didn't fully understand the ramifications of that. And I said, he asked if I said no, I'd never done it. He asked if I wanted to try it and I said yes. And it was a really easy, simple answer, which, I've always said that when I tell people this story, including my parents many years later when they found out, it's a very unsatisfying answer for people because it seems so glib or casual that I just was like, sure, I'll try it. But at that point, I was so uncomfortable being in my body. It didn't matter what he was offering me. I would have said yes. I just wanted out. I
right.
wanted an exit. I talk about this in the book a lot, that I was always looking for an exit. I didn't want to stay in my body. I didn't want to stay in feelings. I didn't want to stay in the physical places I was in. So I said yes. And I shot heroin for the first time that night and lost my virginity. And that began my journey with heroin. I
Yeah.
didn't get strung out right away, for that first sort of, was a little under 2 years that I was using with that boyfriend. I didn't tell anybody else in my life, not my friends. No one knew. I still kept up my grades and all of my other activities. And for the majority of that time, I was really only using on weekends. During the week, I would, do school and and then on the weekends, I would lie and go to his house. At a certain point, I crossed lines that I said I wouldn't cross, like bringing drugs home. But again, I was very controlled about the way that I did things. I didn't want anyone to know. I wasn't
Right.
interested in partying with people. It was really about giving myself some sense of control over those feelings.
Yes.
Yeah. And when I stopped, the first time that I stopped, shortly before my 15th birthday, that was when my parents noticed something was wrong, because my emotions, having been sort of subdued for almost 2 years, were all over the
Over the
place.
place. Yep.
And they sent me to therapy. In the years between that first time of getting off of heroin and when I started again a few years later, I still was taking pills. I went through a period of time doing a lot of crystal meth. I, experimented with lots of other drugs. Men certainly played into my addiction. My relationship patterns are very in line with all of my behavior around drugs. And, so it's the times when I was really sort of on the straight and narrow are the times
Yeah.
when people thought something was wrong. And then when I
Oh.
was using drugs, everybody thought I
All
seemed
of a sudden
fine.
you became erratic instead
Yes.
of just on this one plane.
Hmm.
Okay, so did you have the wherewithal when you started going to therapy when you were still in your mid-teens to
Hmm.
reveal, or did you have the wherewithal and the knowing to keep that a secret?
Oh, I kept a lot of it. I revealed some things. I
Uh-huh.
revealed that I had experimented with drugs. I
Okay.
revealed that I had this boyfriend that I didn't tell my parents about. I
Mm-hmm.
revealed those sorts of things, but I did not reveal everything. No.
Okay.
There
All
wasn't
right.
anybody in my life that I was completely honest with during those years.
So, including yourself. And
Yes, yeah.
so, a couple years go by
Mhm.
and you get started again. And is this where
Mhm.
things got really bad?
Yes. So when I was right out in my early 20s, I started again. It was a time, this was the late 90s in Los Angeles, and heroin was seemed to be everywhere then in like the mid
Mm-hmm.
to late 90s. It was kind of like just past like the heroin chic like look in fashion, and a lot of people used in a very casual way. I know a lot of people that experimented with heroin in the late 90s, mid to late 90s, and didn't end up addicted.
Yeah, that's
um
the way addictions work. That
yeah,
some people's brains get bent that direction and other people's don't.
right, right. So I when I started again, I was smoking it. But I quickly went back to using a needle. And um that was about like that first run was about like 9-10 months. And at the time I had this on again off again relationship with a man who lived in Paris, because I had lived there for some time in between these years. And at this point it had been 10 years of me using off and on. He caught me in the act of using,
Mm-hmm.
and that propelled me. I don't even know that I wanted help. I mean, I had certainly been trying to stop and couldn't, but I felt like I had no choice but to reach out for help because I couldn't deal with his emotions over it. So I
Right.
reached out to my mom, and she helped get me into, detox and a 28-day residential program.
Yeah, because
So
I
that,
think for most people who have not been exposed to intravenous drug use. A
hmm,
lot of people have been exposed to certainly alcohol and cigarettes, but
right.
marijuana, even LSD. But if
Hmm.
you've never been exposed to intravenous drug use
Hmm.
and to just walk in on that, especially you're still a very young woman at
Yeah,
this point, and you're also in a trusted relationship, even if
hmm,
it wasn't like a long-term partnership, it had to have been
right.
horrifying. So
Oh yeah. I mean, he was, I mean, I think that there were things that he was having some suspicions that something was wrong because of my behavior, which is why he ended up catching me.
oh yeah.
But so this had been a decade of me hiding, and suddenly now my parents knew, friends knew, and people were shocked. My parents were so shocked; they had
Right.
no idea. And then from that was at 23, and it still took me another 5 years of that. Next 5 years is when things got really bad. I
Right.
continually relapsed. I don't even know, I couldn't even tell you how many times, 50 times, 100 times. A lot of the relapses, I would relapse and hide it and still go to 12-step meetings and act like I had not relapsed.
Yeah.
I went to rehab a second time, had some sobriety again, and then relapsed again. It was just continual for me until I was 28. When I was 28, I got pregnant with my first son and decided to have this baby despite what everyone thought was a good idea.
Right.
And I was using drugs when I found out I was pregnant, and I had to find a doctor who was willing to detox me. At that time, the doctors that I spoke to wanted to put me on methadone, and I really didn't want to go on methadone because then I knew the baby would be born addicted.
Of
I
course.
finally found a doctor who would detox me, and he did so over the course of 7 days using buprenorphine, which is something that is commonly used now in drugs like Suboxone.
Mm-hmm.
And it definitely helped with the withdrawal symptoms, made it a little less traumatic to my body as well. And I made this commitment that I was going to stay off of drugs for the duration of the pregnancy. I did
Oh
not
yeah.
have confidence in myself that I'd be able to stay off drugs after he was born. I
Right.
felt very ambivalent around being a mother. I had never wanted children. I wasn't sure why I was doing this.
Mm.
Um, and when I had him, you know, I had one of those lightning bolt moments that sounds very sort of cliche, but the second that the nurse put him in my arms, I looked into his eyes and felt something I had never felt before, and had that overwhelming thought that just was at the forefront of my mind, which was, I love you more than I hate myself. That was extremely powerful for me because I had walked around with self-hatred and shame for so long, but I felt determined to try whatever I could to not go back to drugs. I really didn't want to leave that legacy for him, and I didn't. I never used again.
Was this the first time that you actually said to yourself, I hate myself, or did you know for a long time that the root of this is I just hate myself?
Oh, I hated myself for as long as my earliest memories are feelings of self-loathing. You know, I was sexually abused when I was 4 years old. I didn't tell anyone until I was an adult. And that did a lot to creating this narrative and this belief system I had about myself that there was something wrong with me, that I was somehow I had these feelings at a very young age that I was wrong, that I was a monster, and that if people knew that I had been molested, if people knew that I had depression, if people knew that I continually thought about harming myself, that they wouldn't love me. And I think that's a very primal thing for people, even for everybody, even if they're not addicts. We all go through life sort of sometimes having these backward belief systems about ourselves where we think, oh, if anyone knew this, they wouldn't love me. That's at the root of so many sort of destructive behaviors.
Well, and I think that you echo what a lot of people who were sexually abused, especially at a very young age, echo, which is your brain gets very quickly and easily manipulated because you're so young. You don't know. And to have somebody tell you, if somebody knows this about you, you're going to be in trouble. This is your fault. This is not something that you can tell anyone. And so, all right. So, do you have more children now?
I do, yeah. But there's a big age difference. So I
Is there?
My first son, Atticus, is 16. He'll be 17 in August. And so I've been it was when I was pregnant with him that I stopped using. So I've been more than 17 years off of drugs. And then I have a almost 3-year-old.
Okay.
So there's a big age difference there.
So how did you approach talking to your son about drug abuse, about sexual abuse, about how did you instill that sense of normal sexuality and do your best to craft him into the young man that he is? And now, what did you learn in all of your years since then that you're now looking at your 3-year-old and going, I'm going to do this a little bit differently, and here's what I've learned and how I'm going to do it differently?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think, with my first son, I was off of drugs, but I was learning how to function as an adult for the first time. And, I made a lot of mistakes. I still had a lot of trouble regulating my emotions. And it took, years of really doing work on myself, talk therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy, working with a psychiatrist to find a medication that helps regulate my moods, all of those things that I had been really reluctant to do when I was younger because I had this fear of being labeled as crazy, that I really resisted that. And as I did those things, and then there was spiritual work as well, I found that I was able to start opening up about this part of my life in ways that I hadn't before. And as I opened up to people about it, I realized that the shame dissipated not just for me, but it helps other people dissipate their shame.
Yes.
And that's that's a very sort of like human to human satisfying connection. So, the first time that Atticus asked me if I had ever done drugs, we were watching a news program. Somebody had overdosed. And I sort of hesitated. I wasn't sure how to answer the question. I kind of evaded it.
How old was he at this time?
He was 12. He was 12.
So old-ish, but still
yes.
your little guy.
Yes. But I realized that he was going to be 13 before I knew it. And I was 13 when I started using. Now, granted, we are very different personality wise, and he's in a very different home situation than I was, and all of those things, but I still felt a responsibility to open up a dialogue with him. And so I did. I sat him down one day shortly before his 13th birthday, told him I wanted to talk to him. I said, remember that you had asked me if I ever did drugs, and I want to talk to you about some experiences I had when I was younger. And I told him everything without going into detail.
Sure.
I told him that I had been harmed by somebody when I was very young, that I hid that from my parents, that I really struggled with wanting to hurt myself, and that I was looking for some way to sort of control my feelings. And I told him that, I had started using heroin when I was 13 and struggled with it for 15 years off and on until I got pregnant with him. And, he listened and asked a couple of questions, but nothing, he wasn't really looking for detail at that point. Asked me a couple of questions. And then when we were done, we sat there for a minute and he hugged me and he said, "Mom, I'm so sorry you had to go through all that."
Oh, wow. That's
And
so nice.
yeah. And I think that there's a tendency that we want to protect our kids from our pasts, where we think like, oh, if we let them know we did these things, it's like giving them permission to do it. And I really don't look at it that way. That's something that I've learned is so important. It's not just about drugs. I think that anything that we struggled with as young people, we have a responsibility as parents to open up with our children in age appropriate ways about what those struggles were.
Mm-hmm.
Adolescence at best is hard.
Right. Yeah.
And all of us struggled with something in adolescence, whether it was anxiety or we were really shy or, there's a million things you could fill in the blank with. I think that it's so important to open up those conversations and share a little bit about what we went through
Mm-hmm.
without asking them to do the same, because it leaves the door open for them to come to us when they have a problem.
Right.
And I think that from my experience with my own child and with other people who have done this with their children, they've created a trust there by trusting their kid with this information. That's
Mm-hmm.
just invaluable. That just
Yeah.
is it's hard for that to exist if we don't open up with them in these ways.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I know life evolves rapidly, but with your younger child, do you have kind of a strategy that you want to slowly introduce these concepts over the course of young childhood, versus it just being like, oh God, I was scrambling how to survive, and then my
Right.
kid comes to me at 12. What advice would you give to children of younger parents who they may not have faced an addiction, but they don't want their
Right.
child to face an addiction?
Well, again, like I think the most important thing is opening up that dialogue about feelings, about emotions, because I think that there's no happy 13-year-old that is looking for heroin.
Right. Yeah,
Kids experiment
absolutely.
with drugs, certainly.
Sure.
Alcohol, marijuana, other things later on in college. That's within the realm of sort of like, I don't want to call it like normal, but was in the realm of like, you're not in dangerous territory. What
Well,
scares me, yeah, go ahead, sorry.
I think that there's a big difference
Mm-hmm.
in drugs like heroin, like OxyContin,
Mm-hmm.
like the hydromorphones, the really powerful opiates, as well as methamphetamines, I think can fall into this category.
Yeah.
There's a difference between, yes, I tried it a few times, or even as the case of marijuana and alcohol, yes, I use it on the regular
Socially,
throughout my
right.
life, versus one hit of heroin takes a lot of people down a path that just destroys their life. Same thing with OxyContin. One dose of OxyContin can take people down a path that absolutely destroys their life. And so that is, I think, a major difference between marijuana, LSD, and mushrooms, because eventually you just come to the point where you're like, okay, I'm not a normal functioning adult if I am
Right.
experiencing this every day, versus the benzodiazepines and the opiates. They bring you down to a like, I don't have to pay attention to my to the hurt. I don't have
Well,
to
they
pay
take you
attention to the
out. It's
hurt.
it's all about like taking you out of your body. I mean, one of the things that I learned in these years of recovery, 17 years of recovery, is how to sit in my body through pain. And I don't mean just physical pain. I mean like emotional pain.
Yeah.
And that's a hard thing to learn when you had
Yeah.
when you had these sort of bad coping skills. And I think the other thing too is that even like a kid experimenting with alcohol, there's a difference between the kid that's like, I got to drink to make it to school today because I need to tune out, versus the
Yeah.
kid like trying alcohol at a party. Yes, it could still have dangerous consequences. That's a whole other discussion, but there's just a difference in what you're reaching to it for.
Mm-hmm.
They call, with opiates, they're called painkillers for a reason. People are taking them for pain. They're taking
Yeah.
them for emotional pain. And I really think that with the drug crisis, it's with the, especially the opioid crisis, we really have to look at long-term aftercare for people, because that's where we address what's at the root of it. It's more
Yeah.
than just they have become a drug addict. It's
Mm-hmm.
what's at the root of that pain.
Yeah, I agree. And so you mentioned something a moment ago that is fascinating to me, which was you figured out that when you shared your story,
Mm-hmm.
other people got benefit from
Mm-hmm.
you making yourself vulnerable and sharing a story. So, why did you choose to write such a deeply personal
Mm-hmm.
and very just, there are times that you kind of am like, ooh, can I go there? But you never shy away from just being
Mm-hmm.
like, this was what I went through.
Mm-hmm.
So, how did you go through all the emotions that it took and all of the work that it took to
Mm-hmm.
create such a deeply personal work?
So, first of all, I had the distance time wise from these events, which really I needed. I couldn't have written this book 5 years after the fact, right? I needed that time and space and recovery. I had, I'd done all of it, put in all this work emotionally and spiritually to be in a place that I could dip back into those sort of darkest moments. I knew when I sat down to write this that I wasn't going to do it unless I was willing to shine the harshest light on myself.
Mhm.
I was going to write it without worrying about being likable. Because I spent a lot of time like wanting to be liked and wanting to be loved, but then also really harming people. And I think that it's important that I portrayed myself within the most honest light possible.
Yeah.
And I also wanted to make sure that the other people that I portrayed in the book were portrayed in a way that it was only through the lens of my story and my experience. I didn't want to tell anyone else's story for them or fill in the blanks or throw anyone under the bus in any way. And I feel
Right.
like I did that. I think that it's important to go there. I wanted to go to those dark places without getting overly graphic, because I wanted people to see the parts of me that they related to, and then that gives people a better understanding of like how someone like me ended up in those places. The thing that's been it's not even surprising, but the thing that's been really nice is how many people have told me that they understand addiction differently than they had before, or that it gave them a better understanding of it, a deeper understanding of it, because they could relate to so much of what was going on in that like internal dialogue, because
Right.
these are all sort of things that we struggle with because we're human beings.
Yeah.
And that's really, for me, whenever we create something, whether it's a podcast or a song or a book or a film or a painting, the reason that people react to these things, or that it resonates with them, is because they are seeing some part of the human experience reflected back at them, even if
Yeah.
it's in an abstract way. And that feels good. It's not that just that it feels good. We feel seen, and we
Mm-hmm.
feel less alone, and we feel understood, and we feel deeper understanding and empathy for others. And that's really sort of what the overarching goals were for me with this book, was
Yeah.
not just for the people who are struggling with addiction, but also for allowing people in to, my mind
Yeah.
and the experience of being an addict in a way that feels very intimate and in a way that sheds light on it that they may not have seen before.
So sometimes when we shed the harshest light on ourselves, we also shine a very harsh light on the people who have been around us our entire lives. And so, did your family struggle with you writing this book? Did you have to sit them down and say, look, my childhood wasn't always ideal and I'm going to write about some of it? How did you go about bringing your family on this journey with you, knowing that they've probably been really frustrated with you? Like, why can't you just snap out of it, kid? The whole thing.
Right. So, I mean, first I did my best to protect their anonymity. I don't share a last name with anyone in my family or my husband or my children. And I told them, I mean, particularly with my mother, I think both of them have read the book. They read advanced copies. But this was after, it was kind of set in stone. There wasn't much I could change at that point, but they both read advanced copies. And they, I think that especially for my mom, it was really difficult to read some of this, but they're so supportive and so proud of how far I've come. And as my father has said, like, these things happened. It's not like you made something up. So you're just telling it how you experienced it. Now, they experienced it in a different way, right? And we've talked about that. Their experience of like the same moment is totally different than mine because they're a different person. It's through their lens, through their filter.
Right.
One thing that I was really fortunate with this book is that I had done such a good job of journal keeping and letter writing.
Yeah.
All through my like college years and early 20s, I wrote letters back and forth with my best friend, recorded audio tapes. I had primary sources for this that were incredible. And I fact checked with people, with my parents, with friends, with ex-boyfriends about certain things just to make sure what I had recorded was as accurate as possible. So yeah, I mean, the short answer then is that I think it was difficult for them. I'm sure parts of the book were difficult for them to read, but I also, there's a lot that I left out of the book in terms of their personal lives.
Yeah.
I really only kept it focused on what my experiences with them were without dragging their dirty, for lack of a better term, like dirty laundry into the picture. I didn't ever want to do that. So I was very careful to keep it focused on our interactions rather than things that I know, but that really aren't my story to tell.
Sure. Well, I want to get into our lightning round next. And I actually want to start our lightning round with one of the questions that you have, because I think it's really important. So just in 30 seconds or less, and then we'll get into our real, just really quick answers. What advice do you have for other mothers who have struggled with or are still struggling with addiction?
The number one thing I can say is that you're not alone. There are so many people struggling with addiction. There are over 20 million people in this country struggling with addiction. And you don't stop becoming an imperfect person when you become a parent.
Yeah, no. I think everyone who has parents can agree to that. And I also, just as someone who personally has gone through, everybody's been through struggles, and I personally have been through some struggles. You don't ever become perfect. You got to live with those imperfections, and I think that's power right there. So,
and one more thing, I know this isn't lightning, but one more thing I want to say is that one lesson that I really got from my mother is the ability to tell our children we're sorry. Because there was a point, in this, I had a scene in the book where we were with a therapist and I sort of unloaded on her all the things I was upset about. She didn't get defensive, and she just looked at me and said, I am so sorry. I am so sorry that you felt that way, and I should have done more to protect you. That was huge for our relationship, and that sort of validation for our children that maybe they didn't always have perfect experiences with us is very powerful.
Yeah. Well, That is great advice. I think that is great advice, not just for mothers, not just for parents, but for people in general. Just say you're sorry. It's a really powerful couple of words. So here we go, lightning round.
Okay.
What is your number one strength?
My number one strength is honesty.
What is the thing that you still struggle with the most?
Compassion for myself.
If you could give one word of advice to your younger self, what would it be?
One word.
Couple of words.
Couple of words. You can show people who you are and they will still love you.
What keeps you up at night?
Wondering if my children are going to have a habitable world to grow up in.
That is very, very true. You know, today we're recording, it's March the 26th. We're all in a moment of some fear. And so I can completely understand that as a parent. Who has been your greatest inspiration?
Probably my mom.
Yeah. Okay. I could ask you so many questions about why, when, and how, just because I know there's a lot of stories there. But I'll get to our last question, which is, God to you is?
Connection.
All right. Well, thank you so much, everyone. Erin Khar, you can find her at www.erinkhar.com. That's www.erinkhar.com. Check out her new book, Strung Out, One Last Hit and Other Lies That Nearly Killed Me. Thank you, Erin, so much for being here with me today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
One of the best ways to prevent infection is to keep your defenses up so you are not suddenly caught off guard. Strong immunity is the best way to help you and your loved ones stay healthy. You can do something every day to boost your immune system and give yourself and your family peace of mind. One of those things that you can do every day is drink tea. The benefits of tea have been researched in hundreds of peer-reviewed studies that have been conducted over decades, with thousands of years of traditional usage as well. Teas contain diverse immune-boosting ingredients such as polyphenols, catechins, and theaflavins. The more diverse the tea that you drink, the more diverse the immune-supporting ingredients are. I've partnered with Peak Tea to help you get ingredients into your body that support the immune system. Peak Teas are all 100% organic. They are triple toxin screened to ensure that they are free from pesticides, heavy metals, and toxic molds. They're also extracted using a cold brew crystallization technique that preserves active compounds in their maximum potential. The tea is so powerful that it is endorsed by physicians like Dr. Mark Hyman and Dr. Jason Fung. Because it is so simple, it has superb ingredients, and it has a high concentration of ingredients that help to support the immune system. Right now, Peak Tea has an immunity promotion that you can take advantage of. Head to www.peaktea.com/Lindsey and save up to 15% off of the immunity support blends, as well as getting free shipping on all of the immune support bundles. That's www.peaktea.com/Lindsey. www.peaktea.com/Lindsey. I came to yoga over the course of several years, and what I found was it had a profound impact on my mental stability, as well as my ability to control my breath and my emotional response to triggers. This was really important to me because when I was younger, I suffered from bulimia, and bulimia is one of those mental health disorders where you feel very much out of control. You binge eat with the perception that there's no ability for you to stop or to go like, okay, I've eaten enough calories, all of these things. But for me, I found that practicing yoga, practicing meditation helped to really quiet, as Patanjali says, quiet the monkey mind. And so I think that yoga and meditation can be an exceptional practice for anyone with any kind of mental health disorders, because we know from studies that meditation and yoga change this brain's structure and function. It's been found that people who do more meditation practice develop more robust brain structures in certain areas of the brain where it's really important, where our emotional control centers are. Multiple studies have shown that yoga practices and mindful meditation help to increase our gray matter. It makes our brains thicker and more resilient, especially in the areas of our brain where we have emotional regulation and executive functioning. We also know that practicing yoga improves our long-term memory. It also helps to mediate our emotional responses. So if anyone out there is struggling with anger, practicing yoga and meditation can help to prevent you from lashing out in anger. We also know that stress is greatly reduced with the practice of yoga and meditation. People who practice yoga and meditation tend to be more resilient to stress, are less likely to have stress-related depression, and are less likely to have post-traumatic stress disorders. So all of these parts of our brain, resiliency to stress, stress-related depression, and post-traumatic stress, are all housed in the hippocampus portion of our brain. And multiple studies have shown that the practice of meditation and yoga can increase hippocampal activation, and it can make us more resilient against depression as well as stress disorders. We know that in people who suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder, they have a considerable reduction in the size and the volume of the hippocampus. And so we can actually mediate our disease processes by practicing yoga, practicing meditation, and expanding the size of some of these brain structures that get reduced in response to mental health disorders. Mindful meditation, especially in long-term expert meditators. I love that term because what does it even mean to be an expert meditator? I don't think it has to mean anything special. All you have to do is sit down for just a couple of moments every day on a long-term basis and practice mindful meditation, because it has been shown to decrease the size and the activity of the amygdala. Why does that matter? Well, the amygdala is critically important in mental health disorders that are characterized by anxiety. And so if you are someone you know is suffering from anxious feelings, or even with bulimia, that anxiousness that comes around food and other eating disorders may also be implicated. We know that we can reduce the size and the activation of the amygdala simply by having a mindful meditation practice. We also know that asanas, our different yoga postures, our different movements, increase our ability to handle stressful situations, and people who practice asanas also tend to be more relaxed. We've seen this not only from anecdotal evidence, but there have actually been randomized controlled trials that shows that people who practice yoga movements tend to have improved strength, improved awareness, greater joy in their life. Participants who practice yoga express that they feel more at ease and more at peace, that they have greater mental calmness, greater physical relaxation, and tend to wake up more well-rested and more relaxed. In addition to all of these amazing benefits that asanas can bring us, people who practice yoga also have less fatigue, less stress. They tend to worry less. So if you have any kind of mental health disorder, such as depression, that's characterized by a worry and a rumination on what might go wrong, practicing asanas can help to quiet all of those signals. We also know that people have less negative emotional feelings when they practice asanas. All of these things don't have to be hard. And I think that's the best part about yoga, is it only takes a moment each day to change the structure and the function of your brain. We also know that when people practice mindful movements that have a slow rhythmic breathing, it's not just the structure of our brain that changes, but it's also our hormonal and our neurotransmitter regulation. So people who practice yoga and meditation tend to have increased parasympathetic tone and increased vagus nerve tone. This means that instead of being stuck in that like fight or flight kind of mentality, you can actually just stay a little bit calmer. People who practice yoga also have improved heart rate variability. So if you are someone who perhaps has a mental health disorder such as panic attack, where you're getting those anxious feelings all at once that feel like they are just attacking you, the practice of yoga can help to bring your heart rate back down to normal faster than if you were not practicing yoga. We also know that yoga decreases cortisol output. So this is our stress hormone, which is really just in overdrive in so many people. In addition to decreasing cortisol, we also have increased oxytocin secretion and increased prolactin. So these are two hormones that make us feel like a community, a group of people who are all in this great big world together. We also know that yoga in some people can decrease norepinephrine. So another word for norepinephrine is noradrenaline. So if you are suffering from any kind of mental health disorder where you're just feeling panicked, nervous, anxious, the practice of yoga and the practice of meditation may be exactly what you need to not only change the structure and function of your brain, but also change the way that your body's hormonal and neurotransmitter responses work in your body.
The Lindsey Elmore Show is written and produced by me, Lindsey Elmore. Show segments are produced by Sue Procco and Kelsey Lorman. Production design, sound design, and editing is by Jive Media. If you have a question about this or any other episode of the podcast, send us an email to hello@lindseyelmoreshow.com. And hey, since you're still here, take a moment to subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. And while you're at it, go over and follow us on Instagram @Lindsey Elmore Show. This helps us bring the pod to more people.